Okay, so what we have here today is a little lab on nesting symbols. Um, I'm going to keep this file be attached for download. Um, and what I want you guys to do is we're going to take these objects and we're going to create some animation with it. You see down here I have the layers named. Here's a car, a police car. Here's the tire, and window, and here's a little light. So the first thing I want to do is I want to convert these into a symbol, and I want to make sure they're graphic, and I'll call this police car. Make sure it's a graphic, hit OK. I'm going to now make the tire a symbol. Or wheel. And same thing here. F8 is the keyboard shortcut to convert to symbol, and I'm going to call this one light. So now in my library, next to my properties, I have my three symbols. But when I'm animating, I only want to have just one object to animate. I don't want to have to fight against each other's animations by having the car animate across the screen and then having to animate the wheels separately and then having to animate the light, and it just doesn't work well that way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these objects and I'm going to nest them inside of the police car. This is the trickiest part about this, is kind of understanding the organization system that Flash has. So you'll notice right now I'm in scene 1. If I double click this car, you'll notice that I'm inside of scene 1 and then I'm inside the police car. So it's kind of like a folder system. Scene 1 is your main folder and then your police car is your subfolder. So from here I'm going to go ahead and rename these layers and create new layers as needed. So then I've just created a new layer called front wheel, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my front wheel and I'm going to click and drag it onto here, and I'm going to want to have it above the actual police car, and then I'm just going to place it into place where I think it'll look nice. I can duplicate this layer. Now I have a separate wheel, and I can go ahead and just move this one to the point to where I need this one, and then rename it. Back wheel. And all I did was right click, obviously, and then duplicate layer, and then renamed it. Now one last thing I need is my flashing light, and this is where we're going to be nesting nesting symbols. So my flashing light is going to be my light, and I'm going to go ahead and place that right around here somewhere. That looks good. So from here I can start to add some animation. I'm going to insert a frame at frame 24. And then on the front wheel and the back wheel, I'm going to create motion tween. So right click on your timeline on that layer and hit create motion tween. So now I've got my wheels. So the one nice thing about creating motion tweens is that especially for something like a wheel, to create rotation is fairly simple. If I select my wheel and I'm on my very last frame of my 24th frame in this case in my timeline, make sure your playback head's scrubbed all the way to the end. And I can begin to start to create some animation. So it's a little tricky at first. If you select just here, you're not going to get the settings that you need. If you just select here on the wheel on the stage, you're not going to get the properties that you need over here. So if you select directly in the timeline, you'll see that now you're actually selecting the properties of the motion tween versus the actual graphic symbol of the wheel. So it's a little confusing in that aspect. So they're two separate properties. If I were to select this wheel, it gives me properties as far as color effect and how the symbol actually animates, whether I want it to loop or play once or single frame, color effect and position and size and so forth. But if I select down here in my timeline, you'll see that it changes, and now I actually can rotate and animate it. It has an ease in, ease out. It has the rotate at direction, clockwise or counterclockwise. For now, I'm going to put 1. I'll leave it at clockwise, and I'll just go ahead and test it. It's actually going the opposite way, so I need to change it to counterclockwise. And now it's working just fine. So I can go ahead and do the same thing for this wheel. Remember, just by selecting on the actual symbol here itself doesn't mean it's going to animate well. So, and it's not going to, it's not going to bring up the properties to animate it well. So make sure you click in your timeline, and now it'll give you the option to rotate once and counterclockwise. And now both the wheels are spinning. So if I play it back, we're good to go. So if I go back into I'm still in my police car symbol. So if I go back to my main folder, basically the main stage, scene 1, and since I have 100 frames to play, you'll see that even though I have 24 frames of animation, it loops the entire time. So that's a pretty nice feature. Now I can actually delete this layer because I'm not going to need it because I have it all nested within the one symbol. The goal of this is to actually have just one symbol to animate, and as you see when I move it around on the stage now, all 3 objects move together and I only have one item selected, which is a really nice feature. So the other thing is I'm going to delete this light layer because I'm not going to need that anymore because I have it nested inside of here. If I need another one for another car or something, I always have it inside my library. Now, to get inside this symbol, I double click on it. And now I'm inside the police car. This is how you double check where you are at all times in the top left corner. And the other thing I want to do is I want to make this light flash. So this is where I talk about nesting symbols. I've already got one symbol in here, which is the car basically. And then I've got my other symbols, which are the wheels. And then I've got my flashing light. Now you'll see that I'm inside scene 1, which is inside the police car, and now I'm inside the light layer. So now I'm actually going to do some keyframe animation on the light, and I'm just going to do colors. So here I'll rename this to light, flashing, light. And what I'll do is, using my paint bucket tool in this case, I'll start with a black, and what I'll do is I'll select click right in there on my first keyframe, and then I'm going to select just that area that I filled in with the paint bucket tool. I'm going to hit new frame, or whoops, new keyframe, F6, and I'm going to select just that area. You notice how it doesn't select the outline, it only selects the inside color. So unless you want to change the outline as well, make sure that you just have the interior of that semicircle highlighted. Now the other thing I can change the color here. I'll start with a red radial gradient. So now I've got two frames, black and a red radial gradient. And then I'll hit F6 again. And I'm going to now change it to a bright red. And I'm going to hit F6 again. And I'm going to change it to I'm going to just select my gradient and change it back to that radial gradient. And then I'm going to hit F6 again. And I'm going to change it to black. And I could do it flashing to blue too. So I'll start this one going to blue. And I'll hit F6 again. Select inside and go with blue. And I'll hit F6 again. And I'll select my blue radial gradient. And because it's going to cycle back to the total blackness here, I'm just going to leave it stopped at that frame. And now, when I play this, you see I get the sort of a, what do you call it? A keyframed animation of red and blue flashing police car lights. So when I play it here, you'll see I get my animation playing. I've got my red and blue flashing lights, and now I'm going to go back to my main stage and I'm going to play it, and now I've got it all going at the same time. Now the next thing is, now that I've got this all animating on the stage, which is really great, the other thing I can do is animate it directly all together, nice and cleanly. And I'm going to animate it from one side of the screen to the other side, just to show you. There you go, you've got your little car animating across the screen. And you can also, I'm just going to create a new layer here. Do things like, I'm going to create a motion tween here. Okay, so I'll play it back, and in this case, now I could just have objects in the background pass by. So it gives it the illusion of movement, that it's actually driving down the street with it centered on stage with objects in the background or foreground driving by. So that's the police car demo on nesting symbols. You get a various array of objects in here. We get the flashing light with keyframe animation. Double click on that, which is only 8 frames. It's only playing for 8 frames. and then that cycles the entire time, and as well as these tires, which are 24 frames on the properties setting in here, where they rotate one time at counterclockwise, and then we go back into scene 1 and they're all nested together and they all play together and animate together really nicely, easily, and cleanly. So that's that on nesting symbols in Flash.